Schools at night don't just fall silent. They feel alive, like something inside them is holding its breath and listening. Ethan Parker realized this the moment he stayed after hours in room 12B, the oldest, most avoided classroom in Redwood High. The hallways were too empty, the air strangely cold, and the quiet felt wrong for a place packed with loud teenagers every day. The last bell rang at 3:57 p.m., by 4:03 every student had disappeared, and by 4:10 even the staff had gone home, leaving Ethan alone, except he quickly understood he wasn't. The lights flickered with intentional rhythm, like fingers drumming a warning. Then came footsteps, not from the hall or ceiling but from inside the classroom itself, echoing softly through the empty desks. Ethan snapped around, heart hammering, but there was no one. Then a whisper, his name, came from everywhere at once, crawling out of the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Ethan. The breath froze in his throat. Mr. Rowley, the detention supervisor, was down the hall in the staff room, and no one else was on campus, so the voice didn't belong to the living. The classroom door slammed shut on its own and Ethan's panic spiked. He barely whispered, "Hello?" before the intercom buzzed violently, the static twisting into a distorted voice that didn't belong to any teacher. "Return to your seats. Detention is not over." Ethan hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, yet the voice ordered, "Ethan Parker. Sit down." His body obeyed before his mind did, dropping into the nearest chair as the heavy feeling of being watched settled on him. Then the chalkboard began writing by itself, fast, angry, desperate, warning him, "Do not turn around. Do not look at the back row." The back row everyone avoided. The back row where no one had sat in years. The back row tied to every rumor about the student who never checked out of detention. The chalk screeched again, "He is awake." A cold breath slid across Ethan's neck, slow and hungry, and a chair creaked behind him as something unseen sat down. When he finally turned, the horror wasn't that a ghost was staring back at him, it was the smile carved across its face, the smile of someone whose name the school erased except for one horrifying place Ethan should never have noticed. Carved beneath his desk were the words, "I was here last, 12B. Ethan Parker had never imagined that a single clumsy moment in the cafeteria would drag him into the one classroom everyone in Redwood High avoided after sunset. Yet here he was, sitting in the middle of room 12B with a punishment he didn't deserve and a fear he never expected. He had knocked over a lunch tray by accident, spilling everything onto Principal Reeves' expensive shoes, and even though Ethan apologized, the principal's cold stare made it clear he didn't care about explanations or truth, he cared about control. 1 hour detention, he snapped, and Ethan didn't argue. You should have. Because now, sitting in the center of the room that smelled like old paper, damp wood, and something metallic beneath it all, he could feel the wrongness of the place crawling over his skin. The overhead lights hummed with a strange, uneven rhythm, flickering like a heartbeat that didn't belong to the living. The smile behind him, the one he still refused to look at, stretched wider in the dark corner he could feel but not see, and the cold pressure between his shoulder blades made it clear something unseen hovered too close, breathing too quietly to be human. Ethan closed his trembling eyes, whispering, "Please, don't," but the intercom crackled violently, twisting into a deep, ancient voice that scraped like rusted metal dragging across bone, a voice that did not belong to any teacher in the school. "Look at him. He misses being seen." Ethan's fingers tightened on the edge of the desk as a slow scraping sound rose behind him, the unmistakable grind of metal chair legs dragging across the wooden floor with painful, deliberate slowness. Then came the tapping. 3 soft, unnatural taps on the back of his chair, spaced out like a countdown meant only for him. Panic hollowed out his chest as he turned his head just slightly, just enough to see from the corner of his eye. At first he saw only shadows, the cracked paint on the walls, and the dim outline of rows of empty desks. But then something moved. A pale head lifted from behind the last desk in the back row, rising slowly like something underwater pushing toward the surface. Wet strands of hair clung to a face that looked drained of every drop of life, and its eyes, far too wide, far too dark, fixed on him with an emotion he couldn't read. But the smile looked carved onto the skin, stretched upward in a shape that didn't belong on any human mouth. Ethan flinched so hard he slammed forward into his desk, shaking. The intercom hissed again. "Don't run. He hates when they run." But Ethan didn't listen. His instincts screamed run, run now, and he shot from his seat, stumbling toward the door with desperate hands trembling over the handle. He twisted it, pulled it, shoved it, but it didn't move, not even an inch. The door felt welded shut, sealed by something stronger than locks. "Let me out." His voice cracked, echoing through the empty hall beyond, but no one answered. When he turned, the figure behind him was standing fully now, tall, impossibly thin, clothes soaked as though dragged from the bottom of a lake. Drops of water hit the floor, each one landing with a heavy plink that sounded far too loud. Ethan backed away, heartbeat spiraling into panic. Who are you?" he whispered. The creature's head jerked sharply to the side like a glitching image in a broken video. Its voice emerged in bursts of static, flickering in and out like a corrupted recording. "I stayed after. I stayed after. I stayed after." The words looped endlessly until the static thickened and shaped itself into something clearer, darker, purposeful. "You should have stayed in your seat." Ethan tripped over a desk and crashed to the floor, hands burning as he scrambled backward. The lights above him flickered violently, strobing the room in harsh flashes that revealed the creature in rapid, horrifying jumps. Standing still in one flash, suddenly inches closer in the next, leaning down in the third as though ready to touch him. Ethan's breath came in short, broken gasps as he begged, "Please, please, I didn't mean," but the intercom interrupted again, this time louder than before, drowning every sound in the building. 12B. Report to detention. All students. Now. Then came the footsteps. Dozens at first, then hundreds, filling the hallway with the terrifying rhythm of shoes moving without weight, without bodies, without life. Ethan screamed as the handle of the classroom door began to turn slowly from the outside, the metal groaning under the force of hands he could not see, hands belonging to students who had stayed after school and never gone home. The thing behind him smiled wider. And the door kept turning. The door handle twisted slowly, deliberately, as if whatever waited outside wasn't trying to enter but simply announcing that Ethan Parker had run out of time, and he crawled backward across the dusty floor with wide, trembling eyes fixed on the metal knob, every instinct in his body screaming at him to hide, to stop breathing, to shrink himself into nothing before the thing on the other side found him. But the intercom crackled through the stale air with a warped metallic groan that made his bones vibrate. "Students of 12B, your detention is beginning," and Ethan shook his head, whispering, "No, no, no, this can't be real." Yet the footsteps gathering outside didn't sound human at all, some dragging like dead weight, some thumping like broken limbs hitting tiles, some moving too quickly, others too slowly, forming a nightmarish rhythm that didn't belong to living feet, until 7 silhouettes slid into view behind the narrow glass window of the door, faces flattened against the glass. As if desperate to get in, shapes distorted beneath flickering hallway lights, their eyes dull, empty, lifeless, their clothes soaked, torn, or buried under dust, and Ethan felt his breath stop because these weren't students anymore. The door rattled violently, making the entire frame shudder, and Ethan dove beneath a desk like a terrified child, dust stinging his throat as he tried to silence every breath, but the lights flickered and the air chilled and a thin fog curled along the floor as the soaked boy from the back row, his carved smile still stretched unnaturally wide, crawled onto the top of a desk with jerky puppet-like movements. Staring directly at the desk Ethan hid under without blinking or breathing, making Ethan slap a hand over his mouth to hold back a scream. The intercom hissed, present, and unexcused, and the boy's head snapped backward at an impossible angle with a sickening crack before the door burst open and the 7 shadows spilled into the room, dragging, limping, floating, whispering in a unified rasp, "Sit down," pushing Ethan into an adrenaline surge that made him bolt from under the desk toward the teacher's podium, but the wet boy moved faster, vanishing from the desk and reappearing inches from Ethan's face in a blink, forcing Ethan to stumble back over a chair, begging, "Please, just let me go." The boy opened his mouth, spilling cold murky water across the floor, soaking Ethan's shoes as he spoke in a drowned ancient voice. "Detention ends when the bell rings." The 7 others circled Ethan, closing in, their blurry shifting faces glitching like corrupted footage, their pale fingers brushing his arms, his hair tugging him toward them, and Ethan shrieked as he broke through their circle and sprinted toward the classroom window, not caring how many floors he'd fall if he escaped, but when he reached it, the glass no longer showed the outside world, it reflected room 12B perfectly, except in the reflection Ethan saw a distorted version of himself, sitting at a desk with the same carved smile as the wet boy, and when reflection Ethan stood slowly and pointed behind him, real Ethan turned to see the wet boy inches away again. He shoved past the specter and sprinted for the door, but it slammed shut with such force the walls trembled, and the chalkboard screeched with fresh writing. "Attendance is mandatory. Do not leave. Do not disobey. Do not survive." The lights strobed violently, then vanished into suffocating darkness where Ethan could see only faint outlines as whispers crawled inside the pitch black, overlapping voices hissing, "Stay. Sit. Join us. He needs you. Stay after. Stay forever." while the room stretched into an endless void. Ethan reached out blindly and touched skin, cold, soft, waterlogged skin, and the wet boy's frozen hand clamped around his wrist with a grip so icy it felt like fire, forcing Ethan to scream and tear himself free before sprinting into the dark until a lone spotlight snapped on, illuminating a single desk in the center of the void with Ethan's name freshly carved into the wood. Ethan Parker, detention for life. He stumbled back in horror as the intercom whispered one final command dripping with hunger, "Take your seat, or he will take it for you," and behind him something massive exhaled, wet and slow, as the wet boy's shadow rose and sat in Ethan's chair, grinning wider as the lights blinked back to life, revealing 8 students in room 12B's detention now, and the 8th seat was still empty, waiting for Ethan. Ethan stared at the circle of desks around him, 7 filled by the dead, 1 empty, his seat waiting, as the wet boy sat in Ethan's chair with his head tilted at a bone-deep wrong angle, water dripping from his hair in slow steady drops that hit the tiles like ticking clocks counting down his fate. The hollow, unblinking eyes never left him as the 7 other ghosts turned toward Ethan in perfect unison, their necks cracking sharply like branches snapping under pressure, a synchronized chorus of death ready to follow command. Ethan backed away until his spine hit the chalkboard, whispering, "Please? I won't sit, I won't." But the intercom exploded into violent static, the metallic voice louder and angrier than ever as it roared, "Stay down, Ethan Parker," making his ears ring painfully. "And oh," he shouted, but the classroom temperature dropped instantly, frost racing across the tiles toward his shoes while his breath turned to fog. The chalk screeched across the board by itself, carving over the previous warnings with desperate fury. "Detention is not optional. The teacher has arrived." Ethan froze as a new sound emerged, slow rhythmic tapping from the hallway. Not footsteps. A cane. Each tap heavier than the last, echoing through the air like a countdown to something ancient and wrong approaching. Tap, tap, tap. The door handle twisted, and the dead students immediately straightened in their seats, folding their hands neatly like obedient children, while the wet boy stopped smiling and bowed his head slightly. Ethan's blood turned colder than the frost as the door creaked open and Mr. Rowley, the teacher who was supposed to be alive, supposed to be normal, stepped inside, but this version wasn't human. His eyes were entirely black, pools of darkness swallowing any hint of life. Water dripped steadily from his sleeves as if he had been dragged from a river, his soaked hair clinging to gray skin stretched too tightly over bone, and he didn't breathe or blink. The ghost rose halfway, bowing. Mr. Rowley's head turned toward Ethan with slow mechanical stiffness until he forced a smile far too wet and carved to belong on a living face. "Ethan," he gurgled, voice burbling like something drowning, "you didn't follow the rules." Ethan backed up until he hit the desk as the teacher glided toward him without walking, dragged by unseen force. "You left your seat," he rasped, tapping Ethan's desk with the cane. "You disobeyed," water poured from his raised hand. "And now you must stay, after." Ethan screamed and sprinted around him toward the classroom door, grabbing the handle only to feel burning heat that seared his palm, forcing another scream as the door refused to budge. Behind him, the ghosts whispered in unison, "Sit, sit, sit." Ethan spun around and found the wet boy only inches from his face, whispering a deep rumbling sound like a clogged drain until the words formed clearly. "He drowned me. Don't make him drown you too." Ethan's stomach twisted. "What do you mean? What happened to you?" The wet boy blinked painfully as if remembering was torture, but before he could answer, Mr. Rowley slammed his cane against a desk with a sound like a gunshot that echoed through the room. All the ghosts snapped their heads forward and froze. Mr. Rowley's voice cracked through the air, no longer human. "Class, punishment." He pointed the cane at Ethan. "Bring him." The dead students rose as one, chairs scraping back, limbs cracking as they moved with impossible stiffness. Ethan ran for the windows again, but instead of mirrors, they now showed only an endless black void where the outside world should have been. He hurled a chair at the glass, only for it to pass straight through as if the window wasn't solid, proving the school was no longer connected to reality. When he turned, the wet boy stood inches away again, dripping water. "I drowned," he whispered. "Because I didn't sit." Ethan's voice cracked. "Mr. Rowley killed you?" The wet boy slowly shook his head. "Mr. Rowley didn't exist back then." Ethan froze, whispering, "What?" The boy leaned close, voice faint as the room fell silent. "He is the detention, not the teacher." Before Ethan could react, cold hands grabbed him, dozens of them, pinning his arms and legs as the dead students lifted him off the floor with unnatural strength. "Let go. Let go," he screamed, but they carried him toward his desk, the empty seat waiting like a mouth ready to swallow him. Mr. Rowley stepped forward and tapped the desk with his cane. "Sit." Ethan thrashed violently, but the ghosts pinned him down as the wet boy whispered, "I tried to warn you. What happens if I sit?" Ethan choked out. The boy's hollow voice trembled. "You stop leaving." Ethan shrieked as the ghosts forced him into the chair, pressing his wrists to the wooden surface, pinning his shoulders. Mr. Rowley leaned close, water dripping onto Ethan's lap as he whispered, voice cracking like ice, "You stay, forever." The lights flickered, the room darkened, and the desk beneath Ethan began to creak, something under it waking up, something hungry, something ready to claim its next student. Ethan's back slammed into the wooden chair as the dead students forced him down, their ice-cold fingers clamping onto his shoulders with impossible strength, and though he thrashed wildly, choking on panic and breathless screams, their grip only tightened until it felt like his bones would snap beneath their dead hands. Mr. Rowley loomed over him like a shadow pretending to be human, water dripping steadily from his sleeves and splashing onto Ethan's cheeks with freezing stings that made him flinch helplessly. Beneath him, the desk creaked again and again, like something trapped inside it was awakening after a long and hungry sleep. "Stop!" Ethan screamed, voice shredding, "Please stop!" But no one in the room, living or dead, heard him. The 7 ghosts chanted softly, their voices layered and hollow, "Sit, sit, sit," while Mr. Rowley tapped the desk with his cane once, twice like a knock on a coffin lid. "Your seat is ready, Ethan Parker." The wood beneath Ethan's legs grew unnaturally warm, not like heat but like breath, like something alive pressing upward. He looked down just in time to see the carved name, Ethan Parker, detention for life, begin to glow faintly, then pulse brighter like a beating heart. "No, no, no, let me go," he shouted, fighting against hands he couldn't break free from. The desk responded. The carved letters writhed, shifting across the wood like worms burrowing underneath, and the surface softened, turning into something that felt fleshy and pliable and horribly alive. The wood bubbled, then split open, revealing a black slit beneath the carved name, a mouth inside the desk, widening as if excited to taste new flesh. Ethan froze in horror as the wet boy leaned close, whispering, "Don't fight it. It makes him angry." Ethan's voice shook. "Who is he? What is this place?" The wet boy blinked slowly, painfully. "He's the detention. He's the reason this classroom doesn't end. He feeds on students who break rules." Ethan trembled. "But you died here. Why are you still here?" The boy lowered his gaze, a flicker of human sorrow passing across his ghostly face. "Because I sat down." Ethan's stomach dropped as the desk mouth stretched wider, the tearing wood revealing jagged wooden teeth dripping black, rotting sludge. A foul grave-like smell burst out. Mr. Rowley raised his cane high and whispered, "Class, begin." The ghost students shoved Ethan forward, forcing his chest toward the desk as the mouth inside it drooled darkness onto his shirt. Something inside the slit brushed his cheek, cold skeletal fingers pulling, tugging him toward its waiting throat. "Let go of me." Ethan screamed, kicking violently and knocking 2 ghost students aside, but their bodies bent unnaturally, twisting like broken mannequins snapping back into place. Mr. Rowley slammed his cane onto the floor, the whole room shaking as he thundered, "You will sit. You will stay. You will join your class." Ethan tried to rise, but suddenly the wet boy gripped his arm, whispering, "Don't make him angry. You're helping him." Ethan cried tearfully. The wet boy froze, something flickering in his expression. Regret, pain, a memory he wished he could forget. "I don't want to," he whispered. "But I'm part of him now." The lights flickered violently as the desk mouth yawned wider, the wooden teeth glistening with dark slime. Mr. Rowley leaned close, smiling with that awful carved grin. "Time for your lesson." Ethan thrashed so hard the desk slid across the floor, but the ghosts tightened their grip, whispering their chant again. "Someone help me, please, anyone." Ethan shrieked. And then, something impossible happened. One ghost jerked violently. Then another. Their hands loosened. The wet boy's head snapped upward, eyes widening with fear, real fear. The classroom temperature dropped as if a cold wind swept through the walls. For the first time since Ethan entered room 12B, the ghosts looked terrified. Mr. Rowley straightened slowly, the blackness in his eyes rippling like disturbed water. A whisper rose from nowhere, a deep, ancient voice older than the school itself, vibrating through the floorboards. "He doesn't belong to you." Ethan's breath hitched. The ghost students backed away, trembling. The desk mouth snapped shut in frustration. Mr. Rowley hissed, water pouring from his mouth. You stayed buried, the voice rose louder. The floorboards cracked under Ethan's feet. The lights blew out with explosive pops. Chairs rattled and slid across the room as the voice growled. He is not yours to keep. The ground trembled violently. Something beneath the classroom, something massive, began to rise. The wet boy whispered, "Run. Now." Ethan staggered up just as the floor split wide open beneath them, revealing a dark, endless space deeper than any basement. From that darkness, a shape emerged, tall, human-like but not human at all, and it whispered, "Come with me, Ethan." Every ghost in the room, including the wet boy, backed away in terror, because whatever rose from that darkness wasn't a student, wasn't a teacher. It was the one thing room 12B feared. And now it wanted Ethan. The thing rising from beneath the broken floor was nothing like the ghosts. It wasn't dripping or pale or drowned. It was a towering void, a human-shaped absence that absorbed every bit of light around it, a shadow that moved independent of anything natural. Ethan staggered backward, breath trapped in his throat, whispering, What are you?" But the shadow didn't answer with a voice. It answered by rising, sliding effortlessly upward through the shattered wood without disturbing a single piece of debris, as if the school itself parted willingly to let it through. Mr. Rowley hissed violently, backing away in pure fear, his black eyes widening. "You can't be here," he rasped. "You were buried. You were sealed." The shadow tilted its head, and instantly the entire classroom groaned, walls bending inward, ceiling cracking like the school was terrified of its presence. Ethan instinctively backed toward the locked door, and for a fleeting moment he thought the shadow had come to save him, until it spoke, not from a mouth but from the room itself, vibrating through every desk and floorboard. "Ethan, you open the door. Now you must choose which one keeps you." Ethan shook his head desperately. "I'm not choosing anything. Let me out." The wet boy stepped forward, trembling. "Don't let it touch you," he whispered. "It's not the detention, it's worse." Ethan's voice cracked. "Worse than all of you?" The wet boy didn't blink. "Worse than all of us combined." Mr. Rowley slammed his cane into the floor, summoning a swirling wall of water between him and the shadow. "You cannot take him," he snarled. "He is mine. This is my room." The shadow bent forward slightly, and the entire water barrier evaporated instantly into mist. Rowley choked as invisible force drained him, his skin gray and shriveled. The dead students backed into corners, bodies glitching, limbs twisting out of shape, as if they didn't want to stand near either creature. Ethan pounded the exit door, sobbing, "Please, let me out." But the shadow turned toward him, revealing it had no face, only an endless darkness where a face should be, yet Ethan felt eyes everywhere watching him, studying him. The shadow spoke again, its voice layered like 1,000 whispers overlapping. "This room is a grave. He feeds on the disobedient. But I feed on the forgotten." Ethan felt his bones turn cold. "I don't want either of you. I just came for detention," he cried. The wet boy appeared beside him. "You don't have to choose them," he whispered. "You only need to choose yourself." Ethan stared at him. "What does that mean?" But before he could answer, Mr. Rowley lunged, face twisting into a monstrous expression. "You're mine," he roared, swinging his cane. A burst of freezing air struck Ethan like a hammer, sending him flying across desks until his back slammed the chalkboard, knocking his breath out. The ghosts shrieked, covering their ears. The shadow stabbed a tendril of darkness into the floor, and room 12B split apart violently, the floor breaking in two halves. Ethan lay on the unstable edge as the classroom caved downward, separating him from the shadow on one side and Rowley on the other. Beneath them was no basement, just a swirling black pit that swallowed all sound, deeper than anything man-made. The shadow extended a hand toward him, not reaching but inviting. "Come, Ethan. Leave the room forever." Mr. Rowley clawed across the desks like a soaked corpse, limbs bending the wrong way. "He belongs here," he shrieked. "He broke the rules. He sat in the wrong seat. He didn't obey. He's mine." The wet boy suddenly dove at Rowley, grabbing his arm. "Stop. He's not one of us," he screamed, but Rowley threw him aside like a doll. The wet boy slammed into the wall with a sickening crack and slid down, motionless. "No!" Ethan screamed as both creatures moved toward him, Rowley crawling, the shadow gliding. Ethan was trapped between them, his heart fading, lungs burning as cold sweat dripped down his back. Two forces reached for him, one offering escape, one offering imprisonment, both offering death. Rowley's watery hand grabbed his ankle. Freeze, pain, icy, and the shadow's darkness wrapped around his arm, pulling, numbing, swallowing. Ethan shrieked, "Stop! Let me go. Then a weak whisper rose from across the room, the wet boy barely conscious. Ethan, the desk is the key, Ethan gasped. What? The boy coughed water. The desk bound us here, break it, and we're free? Ethan looked at the glowing desk, split open like a monstrous mouth pulsing with his carved name. Rowley screeched, "No." The shadow whispered, "Choose." Ethan clawed at the floor and screamed, "I choose myself." With a final desperate kick, he broke Rowley's grip and hurled himself across the collapsing floor toward the desk. Rowley lunged after him. The shadow lunged too. Ethan grabbed a wooden chair, lifted it with everything he had, and smashed it into the desk. The desk split open in a violent blast. A shockwave rocked the room. Ghost screamed. Rowley convulsed. The shadow recoiled. Lights exploded. The world collapsed, and Ethan fell into a void where room 12B no longer existed. Ethan fell through absolute nothingness, the world above him, desks, ghosts, Mr. Rowley and the shadow, exploding into white noise before dissolving like dust swirling underwater, leaving him suspended in a place without gravity, sound, or direction until, suddenly, he struck cold concrete with a bone-jarring thud that forced a groan from his cracked throat. His nails were torn, his chest burned, his entire body felt like it had been thrown off a rooftop, but he forced himself upright and froze as he realized he was lying in a hallway, an ordinary high school hallway, with humming fluorescent lights, rows of lockers, and the faint smell of cleaning fluid. Redwood High, but wrong. Silent. Still. Frozen. Ethan staggered forward, touching lockers that felt solid and real, and for a fleeting moment hope flared. "Am I back?" he whispered, then ran forward shouting, "Hello? Anyone?" But no answer came. He dashed past the trophy cases, drinking fountains, posters for school dances, everything perfectly normal, until he turned a corner and the school abruptly ended, not with a wall or door but with broken concrete, as though the building had been sliced off during construction, leaving an impossible cliff where the world simply stopped. Beyond it there was no darkness, no void, just nothing, like existence ended at that jagged edge. Ethan stumbled back in terror. What is this? A normal school bell suddenly rang. Ding. Ding. Ding, echoing down the empty hall, followed by a gentle female voice on the PA. "Students, dismissal is now complete. All children should be off campus." Ethan's blood chilled because he wasn't off campus. A cold draft crept down the hallway behind him, slow and deliberate, and he turned to see room 12B at the end of the hall. Perfect, pristine, brand new, glowing softly like it was freshly painted and waiting. "No," Ethan whispered, backing away. No, please," the PA crackled again. "Any student still inside the building must report immediately to room 12B. His heart dropped. That's not real. That's not real. Then the hallway lights snapped off in sequence. Snap, 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 darkness chasing him like a predator. Ethan ran, but the floor beneath him tilted subtly, funneling him toward room 12B like the school itself was pushing him. "Stop. Let me go," he shouted, grabbing a locker handle, but it burned him like a branding iron, searing his skin until he screamed and released it. The PA repeated calmly, "Report to room 12B, Ethan Parker," and his knees buckled at the realization the school knew his name, knew he was still trapped. Ethan yanked open the stairwell door, desperate for escape, but the stairs stretched upward endlessly into pitch black while the steps beneath him turned soft like tar, sinking under his weight until he pulled his legs free in panic. No exit existed except one. Ethan turned back. Room 12B's door glowed brighter, and behind the small window stood the wet boy, no longer smiling, no longer emotionless, just staring with something that looked like warning or regret. He pressed a hand to the glass, looking at Ethan with a silent plea. Ethan shook his head desperately, sobbing. Please let me go," the wet boy mouthed something. 3 words. Ethan squinted through tears and finally deciphered, "You broke it." His stomach twisted. Breaking the desk didn't free them. It freed the thing the desk was containing. Ethan whispered, horrified, "Then? I didn't save anyone." The wet boy leaned his forehead against the glass and mouthed again, "You freed him." Ethan collapsed to his knees as the door to room 12B swung open by itself, spilling warm, soft light into the hallway, and a deep layered voice whispered, "Come finish your detention, Ethan." Ethan scrambled backward, but the floor shifted like a conveyor belt, dragging him toward the glowing doorway as his bleeding nails scraped helplessly across tiles. "No. Help. Anyone, help me," he screamed, but the wet boy vanished from the window, replaced by a tall, shadowed, featureless silhouette, the thing from beneath the floor. It stood in the doorway waiting. Ethan sobbed, "No. Please, let me go home. The shadow whispered, "This is home now," and the hallway rippled like disturbed water before sucking Ethan into room 12B. The door slammed shut behind him with a finality that shook the room. Silence followed. Then buzzing lights flicked on overhead. 8 desks now. All filled. Except one. Ethan's name was freshly carved into it, glowing faintly. The wet boy sat closest, eyes empty but sorrowful. "Take your seat," he whispered. Ethan shook violently as the shadow teacher appeared behind him, and the door locked itself forever.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Leave us a comment for more stories like this. Your support means the world. Stay tuned for more videos.